The early morning at Lisbon International Airport was alive with an electric hum of activity. The sprawling terminal was filled with the sounds of suitcases rolling over polished tiles, announcements echoing over the intercom, and conversations in a medley of languages as passengers prepared for their journeys. The golden rays of the rising sun filtered through the tall glass windows, casting a warm glow on the bustling scene. Among the travelers was a family of four: Martin, Elena, James, and little Lucy. Martin, a man in his early 40s, had the calm demeanor of someone used to managing chaos. He balanced 2 steaming cups of coffee in one hand and clutched Lucy's favorite stuffed bear in the other. His wife Elena, in her late 30s, was doing her best to keep her 2 kids in line while double-checking their boarding passes. James, their 10-year-old son, buzzed with excitement about the long flight, while 6-year-old Lucy clung to her mother, wide-eyed and curious. "Do airplanes have beds?" Lucy asked, her innocent voice cutting through the noise around them. Elena crouched down to her daughter's level, brushing a stray curl from Lucy's face.
"No, sweetheart."
"But the seats are comfy, and you'll get a blanket?" Lucy scrunched her nose in mild disappointment. "I wanted a bed like at home." Martin, ever the diplomat, knelt beside her, offering the stuffed bear. "How about this? You and Mr. Bear can share the blanket. I promise it'll be like a cozy little nest." Lucy considered the proposition for a moment before nodding solemnly. Her pout transformed into a small smile as she hugged the bear tightly. Nearby, the departure board displayed the details for Air Transat Flight 236 to Toronto, with the status, "on time." An announcement crackled over the speakers, confirming that boarding would commence shortly at Gate 17. The family made their way to the gate, weaving through clusters of other passengers. There was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, a mixture of eagerness and nervous energy that always seemed to accompany international travel. At Gate 17, flight attendant Maria stood near the boarding desk, greeting passengers with a warm smile. She was a seasoned professional, her every movement calm and efficient. Her colleague Andrew worked beside her, ensuring everything ran smoothly. The two of them had a camaraderie born of countless flights and shared experiences in the skies. A young couple approached Maria, holding hands and grinning from ear to ear. They radiated newlywed bliss, their matching luggage tags reading Mr. and Mrs. "Congratulations," Maria said, her eyes twinkling. "Honeymoon?" "Yes," the woman replied. "It's our first time to Canada. You'll love it." "Have a wonderful trip," Maria said, scanning their boarding passes before they moved forward. Behind them, Martin and Elena queued with their children. James was peppering his father with questions about airplanes. "Dad, do you think they'll let me see the cockpit?" James asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "We can ask," Martin replied. "But remember, it's up to the pilots, and you have to be polite." "I want to see too," Lucy chimed in, clutching her bear. Maria overheard the exchange and crouched slightly to Lucy's eye level. "Maybe after we're in the air, I can talk to the pilots for you." "Sound good." Lucy nodded enthusiastically, her earlier shyness replaced by anticipation. As the boarding process began, passengers filtered into the aircraft in an orderly flow. The Air Transat Airbus A330-243 was a marvel of engineering, its sleek white and blue exterior glinting in the sunlight on the tarmac. The camera of a curious tourist captured its majesty as ground crew members completed their final checks. Inside the cabin, flight attendant Andrew helped an elderly woman with her carry-on bag, lifting it into the overhead compartment with ease. "There you go, ma'am. All set," he said with a reassuring smile. "Thank you, dear," she replied, patting his arm affectionately before settling into her window seat. Elsewhere in the cabin, Maria assisted a businessman struggling with his briefcase. "Let me help you with that," she offered, sliding the bag into the compartment with practiced efficiency. "Thanks," the businessman muttered. "Tight spaces aren't my thing." "Don't worry. Just relax and enjoy the flight," Maria said, her tone light and friendly. Meanwhile, Lucy and James were marveling at their surroundings as their parents guided them to their seats. Lucy's eyes widened as she took in the rows of seats and the small screens embedded in the headrests. Is this where we'll sit? She asked. Yes, Elena said, helping Lucy into her seat and buckling her seatbelt. This is our home in the sky for the next few hours. James was already flipping through the in-flight magazine, pointing out pictures of airplanes to his sister. Look, Lucy. This is the kind of plane we're in. Lucy giggled, her earlier nerves fading as excitement took over. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Pish and First Officer Dirk de Jager were completing their pre-flight checklist. The two men exuded professionalism, their years of experience evident in their calm demeanor. Fuel's confirmed, de Jager said, glancing at the tablet in his hands. 53,000 kilograms loaded for the route, plus reserves. Pish nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the instrument panel. Weather. Clear skies for the most part, de Jager replied. There's a mild jet stream over the Atlantic, but nothing unusual. Good, Pish said with a faint smile. Let's make it a smooth one. The bond between the two pilots was clear, built on mutual respect and countless hours of flying together. They worked seamlessly, their movements synchronized as they prepared for departure. An announcement from the cockpit informed passengers that the aircraft was ready for takeoff. The engines roared to life, a low, powerful hum that resonated through the cabin. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, the passengers felt the subtle vibrations of movement beneath their feet. The camera shifted back to the family of four. Lucy clutched her bear tightly, her wide eyes darting to the window as the plane moved. James leaned over to whisper excitedly to his sister.
This is the best part, he said.
We're about to fly. Elena reached over to squeeze Martin's hand, a small gesture of reassurance. He smiled at her, their silent exchange reflecting years of shared journeys and adventures. The plane reached the runway and came to a brief stop. The voice of air traffic control crackled through the cockpit radio. Air Transat 236, cleared for takeoff. Cleared for takeoff, runway 29er, Pish replied, his hand steady on the controls. The engine surged, and the aircraft accelerated down the runway. Inside the cabin, the passengers felt the force of acceleration pressing them into their seats. Lucy's eyes widened in amazement as the ground fell away, replaced by a breathtaking view of the city below. Wow, she whispered, clutching her bear even tighter. James grinned, his excitement uncontainable. We're flying. The plane ascended smoothly, the city of Lisbon shrinking into a patchwork of rooftops and roads. The golden morning light bathed the wings of the aircraft as it climbed higher, piercing through a layer of wispy clouds. The intercom crackled to life again, this time with Maria's voice. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Air Transat Flight 236, non-stop service to Toronto. We'll be cruising at an altitude of 39,000 feet today, with an estimated flight time of 8.5 hours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey. In the cabin, passengers began to settle in for the long flight. The elderly woman by the window pulled a small book from her bag, adjusting her glasses as she began to read. The businessman opened his laptop, already engrossed in emails. The honeymoon couple held hands, gazing out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. Lucy had drifted off to sleep, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm. James, still full of energy, peppered his mother with questions about what they'd do when they arrived in Toronto. Will we see snow? He asked. It's summer there, sweetheart, Elena replied. No snow this time. James looked slightly disappointed but quickly bounced back, pointing out features of the plane to his father. In the cockpit, the atmosphere was calm and focused. The pilots monitored the instruments, their conversation light, but professional. You ever flown this route during the holidays? De Jager asked. Plenty of times, Pish replied. It's usually smooth, but you never get complacent over the Atlantic. It can surprise you. De Jager nodded, his gaze briefly flicking to the fuel gauges. Everything appeared normal, the reading steady.
Fuel flow's good, he said.
We're on track. Let's keep it that way, Pish replied, taking a sip of his coffee. The camera lingered on the cockpit for a moment before transitioning back to the cabin, where passengers were now fully immersed in their own routines. The hum of the engines provided a constant background, a soothing reminder of the journey underway. The sense of calm and routine belied the challenges that lay ahead, but for now, the passengers and crew were united in the quiet anticipation of a successful flight. The scene began as the Airbus A330-243 soared high above the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Thousands of feet below, the ocean shimmered like liquid silver under the soft glow of the moonlight. Inside the aircraft, the cabin was alive with the quiet hum of life, passengers talking in low voices, others napping, and some watching the in-flight entertainment. The initial thrill of takeoff had given way to the quiet monotony of a long-haul flight. The flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, performing their routine checks. Maria, one of the senior attendants, carried a tray of drinks. Her calm demeanor and genuine smile put passengers at ease as she offered refreshments. Andrew, her colleague, walked ahead, discreetly checking that seatbelts were fastened and that all was well. "Would you like another cup of coffee, sir?" Maria asked an older man in business attire who sat typing furiously on a laptop. The man looked up, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. "Yes, please. Long night ahead." Maria poured him a steaming cup, her movements precise and fluid. "It's a good brew tonight. Hopefully it'll help you power through." The man offered a tight-lipped smile before returning to his screen, and Maria moved on, her eyes scanning the cabin as she progressed. Toward the rear of the plane, Lucy stirred in her sleep, clutching her stuffed bear. Martin, sitting beside her, adjusted her blanket gently, ensuring she was comfortable. James, still wide awake, sat by the window, his face illuminated by the moonlight. He stared out in awe at the endless expanse of clouds, occasionally tracing patterns on the glass with his finger. Elena leaned over to Martin, whispering, "I think this might be the longest he's ever stayed quiet." Martin chuckled softly, his eyes full of warmth. "Give it another hour." James turned to his parents, breaking his silence. "Do you think they'll let me see the cockpit soon?" "Maybe," Martin replied. "It's up to the crew, and only if it's safe." Just then, Maria passed by, overhearing the conversation. She crouched slightly, a warm smile on her face. "Hi there, young man. Still thinking about visiting the cockpit?" James nodded eagerly, his eyes lighting up. "Well," Maria said, "I can check with the pilots. But remember, it'll depend on their schedule." "Deal. Deal," James said, grinning from ear to ear. Maria winked at him before continuing down the aisle. She stopped by the galley, where Andrew was organizing trays for the next meal service. "Everything looks good in the cabin," she said, setting the empty tray on the counter. "Passengers seem calm." Andrew nodded. "No complaints so far. Smooth flight." Maria glanced at her watch. "We're about halfway across the Atlantic. Let's just hope it stays this smooth." As she spoke, the camera shifted to the cockpit, where Captain Robert Pish and First Officer Dirk de Jager were monitoring the flight systems. The atmosphere was serene, with only the soft beeping of instruments breaking the silence. "Fuel flow is consistent," de Jager said, glancing at the gauges. "Everything's in the green." Pish nodded, his experienced eyes scanning the panel.
"Good. Keep an eye on it."
"The Atlantic doesn't forgive mistakes." De Jager smirked slightly. "You're full of cheerful thoughts tonight." Pish chuckled. "Years of flying over this ocean teach you to respect it. No matter how advanced the technology, nature's always got the upper hand." The two men shared a moment of quiet understanding before returning to their tasks. Outside the cockpit, the plane cruised steadily through the night sky, a beacon of human ingenuity and exploration. Back in the cabin, the mood was equally calm. A group of teenagers, part of a school trip, sat near the middle rows. They laughed and whispered amongst themselves, trying not to disturb the other passengers. The elderly woman from earlier was now fast asleep, her book resting on her lap. The honeymoon couple gazed out of the window, their hands intertwined. Suddenly, there was a faint sound, a chime from the cockpit. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to catch Pish's attention. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he examined the fuel gauges. "What's that?" he asked, his tone sharp. De Jager frowned, following Pish's gaze. "That's odd." Left fuel tank pressures dropping. Pish's hands moved swiftly across the controls. He checked the fuel pump switches, verifying their settings. Are the pumps malfunctioning? De Jager shook his head. Doesn't look like it. But the pressure's still falling. Both pilots exchanged a glance, their calm professionalism now tinged with concern. Pish reached for the radio, his voice steady as he contacted the nearest air traffic control. Lisbon Control, this is Air Transat Flight 236. We're experiencing unusual fuel pressure drops. Requesting guidance. The response crackled through the radio, clear but measured. Air Transat 236, confirm the nature of the issue. De Jager responded quickly. Fuel pressure in the left tank is dropping rapidly. No signs of leaks, but we're investigating. Copy that, Air Transat 236. Keep us updated. As the radio call ended, Pish turned to De Jager. Let's run through the fuel system diagnostics. If there's an imbalance, we need to correct it fast. De Jager nodded, his hands moving expertly over the controls. The cockpit, once serene, was now a hive of focused activity. The pilots worked in tandem, their years of experience guiding their actions as they sought to understand the anomaly. In the cabin, the passengers were blissfully unaware of the developing situation. Lucy had woken up and was quietly playing with her stuffed bear, while James continued to stare out of the window. Maria walked down the aisle, checking on passengers and offering smiles of reassurance. "Can I get you anything?" she asked a young woman who looked slightly uneasy. "Just some water, please," the woman replied. Maria nodded, quickly fetching a bottle and placing it on the woman's tray table. "If you need anything else, just let me know." As Maria turned to leave, she noticed Andrew gesturing to her from the galley. She walked over, her professional calm intact. "What's up?" she asked. Andrew's voice was low. "The pilots just called. There's a potential fuel issue. They're looking into it, but they wanted us to stay alert." Maria's smile faltered for a brief moment before she composed herself. "Okay, let's keep everything running smoothly in the cabin. No need to alarm anyone until we have more information." Andrew nodded. Agreed. As the attendants returned to their duties, the camera cut back to the cockpit. The tension had escalated. Pish's hands gripped the controls tightly as he reviewed the data on the screens. "We're losing fuel on the right side now," De Jager said, his voice laced with urgency. Pish's jaw tightened. "This isn't a pump issue. We're dealing with a leak." De Jager's fingers flew over the controls as he began transferring fuel between tanks to maintain balance. "How much fuel do we have left?" Pish did a quick calculation, his mind racing. "At this rate, not enough to reach Toronto." De Jager looked at him, the weight of the situation sinking in. "We're in the middle of the Atlantic." Pish nodded grimly. "We need a plan."
Now?
The once calm flight had turned into a race against time. The cabin lights were dimmed, the quiet hum of the engines filling the vast silence as Flight 236 continued its journey over the Atlantic Ocean. The tension, however, in the cockpit was palpable, the air thick with unspoken concern as Captain Robert Pish and First Officer Dirk de Jager worked methodically to address the rapidly escalating situation. "Confirmed, Captain," de Jager said, his tone betraying the calm mask he wore. "Fuel imbalance is worsening. We've lost more on the left side than initially estimated." Pish leaned forward, his eyes scanning the fuel gauge. The numbers were dropping faster than logic or any malfunction checklist could account for. "There's no question now," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's a leak."
But where?
"And why didn't the sensors pick it up earlier?" The communication radio buzzed, a voice crackling through the static. "Air Transat 236, this is Lisbon Control. Any update on your situation?" Pish grabbed the radio transmitter, his voice steady and authoritative despite the growing stakes. "Lisbon, we're experiencing severe fuel loss. Current projection indicates insufficient reserves to reach our destination. Requesting nearest possible diversion airport." There was a pause, followed by a measured response. "Copy that, Air Transat 236. Stand by for vectoring instructions to Lodge's Air Base on Terceira Island, Azores. Confirm intent to divert." De Jager's eyes darted to Pish. Lodges is over 1,200 kilometers away. Pish nodded, calculating quickly. It's our best shot. If the fuel holds out long enough. Pressing the radio again, Pish replied. Lisbon Control, diverting to Lodges Air Base. Please provide guidance. Roger. Air Transat 236. Stand by for vectors. As the coordinates came through, the pilots wasted no time adjusting their course. De Jaeger manually input the navigation changes while Pish maintained situational awareness, his mind racing with contingency plans. We'll start descending gradually, Pish said, his tone clipped but firm. Less altitude, less fuel burn. Every drop counts now. De Jaeger nodded, his hands deftly adjusting the controls. The weight of the responsibility ahead bore down on them both, but neither wavered. In the cabin, Maria felt the first stirrings of unease. She had been with Air Transat for over a decade, and something in the air felt different tonight. Her instincts told her this wasn't just a routine issue. She caught Andrew's eye across the galley, and he walked over. Anything new from the cockpit? She asked, keeping her voice low to avoid alarming the nearby passengers. Andrew shook his head. They're diverting to an alternate airport. Fuel issue is worse than they initially thought. Maria exhaled sharply, her professional demeanor still intact. We need to stay calm. Passengers can't sense anything's wrong until we know more. Let's keep things as normal as possible. Andrew nodded in agreement, but his furrowed brow betrayed his concern. He moved to assist a passenger who had dropped her bag, while Maria walked through the aisles, her practiced smile in place. A soft chime broke the quiet of the cabin, signaling an announcement. Passengers turned their heads as Captain Pish's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor technical issue with the aircraft's fuel system. As a precaution, we've decided to divert to Lodges Air Base in the Azores. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. There's no cause for concern, and we'll keep you updated as we proceed. Thank you for your cooperation. The announcement was calm and professional, but it was enough to spark a ripple of unease among the passengers. Whispers spread quickly, speculation bouncing from one row to the next. Fuel system, a middle-aged man muttered to his seatmate. That doesn't sound good. Across the aisle, James tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, what's a diversion? Martin hesitated, glancing at Elena for reassurance. It means we're landing somewhere different from where we were supposed to go. Just a safety thing. Elena reached over and squeezed James's hand. Don't worry, sweetheart. The pilots know exactly what they're doing. Maria walked past, offering a warm smile to reassure the family. Everything's fine, folks. Let me know if you need anything. Back in the cockpit, the situation had taken a more dire turn. The left engine fuel gauge had plummeted dangerously close to empty. De Jaeger double-checked the readings, his brow furrowed deeply. Pish, we've completely lost fuel in the left tank, he reported. Right tank is draining faster now, too. Shut down the left engine, Pish ordered without hesitation. We need to preserve what we can for the right side. De Jaeger followed through, the hum of the left engine fading to silence. The loss of thrust was noticeable, but Pish adjusted the controls to compensate. The radio crackled again. Air Transat 236, Lisbon Control. Your current fuel status. Pish replied, his tone clipped. Left engine shut down due to fuel exhaustion. Right engine reserves critically low. Estimating less than 30 minutes of flight time at current burn rate. The voice on the other end hesitated, then responded. Understood. Air Transat 236. You're cleared for priority landing at Lodges. Emergency services are on standby. Pish's grip tightened on the yoke. Thank you, Lisbon. We'll keep you updated. De Jaeger glanced at Pish. If the right engine fails. I know, Pish interrupted. We glide. The cabin atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Maria and Andrew worked tirelessly to keep passengers calm, but even the most stoic travelers were beginning to pick up on the gravity of the situation. A woman in her 40s clutched her husband's hand tightly, her knuckles white. A teenager in the back row stared at his phone, furiously typing a message he hoped would send before they lost connection. Lucy, still groggy from sleep, tugged on Martin's sleeve. Why is everyone so quiet, Daddy? Martin smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It's just a long flight, sweetie. People are tired. Elena leaned in, whispering to Martin, "You think we should tell them what's going on?" Martin shook his head. "Not yet. Let's keep them calm." In the cockpit, the situation reached its peak. The fuel levels on the right engine had dropped to near zero, and alarms began blaring across the instrument panel. "Fuel exhaustion," de Jaeger confirmed, his voice steady but tense. "We've lost the right engine." Pish didn't hesitate. "We're gliding now. Set up for emergency descent. Maintain the glide angle." The aircraft, now powered solely by its momentum, descended slowly but steadily. Pish and de Jaeger worked in perfect synchronization, adjusting the controls to maximize their glide range. "Distance to lodges?" Pish asked. De Jaeger checked the navigation display. "We're within range." "Barely." The cockpit fell into a tense silence, broken only by the occasional beep of warning systems. Both pilots remained focused, their years of experience guiding their every move. The cabin grew eerily quiet as the passengers began to sense the change in the plane's behavior. The hum of the engines was gone, replaced by the faint rush of air against the fuselage. Maria and Andrew moved quickly, instructing passengers to prepare for an emergency landing. "Place your head against the seat in front of you," Maria explained, demonstrating the brace position. "Keep your seatbelt fastened tightly." James looked at his parents, fear in his wide eyes. "Are we going to crash?" Elena pulled him close, her voice calm but firm. "No, sweetheart. The pilots are getting us to safety. Just listen to Maria, okay?" Lucy began to cry softly, clutching her bear tightly. Martin wrapped an arm around her, whispering soothing words. As the lights of Lodge's airbase came into view, a wave of relief washed over the cockpit. The runway stretched out like a beacon of hope against the darkness. "There it is," de Jaeger said, his voice tinged with relief. "Prepare for landing," Pish instructed. "Gear down, full flaps." The cockpit was a flurry of activity as the pilots executed the final approach. The aircraft descended steadily, the runway growing larger with every passing second. The cabin braced for impact as Maria and Andrew shouted final instructions. Passengers clutched their loved ones, their breaths held in anticipation. The Airbus touched down with a heavy thud, the tires screeching against the runway. Sparks flew as the plane skidded along the asphalt, but Pish and de Jaeger maintained control, guiding it to a halt. The cabin erupted into cheers and applause, relief flooding the faces of passengers and crew alike. Maria and Andrew exchanged a glance, their exhaustion momentarily replaced by the satisfaction of survival. In the cockpit, Pish exhaled deeply, his hands trembling slightly as he released the controls. "We made it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. De Jaeger nodded, a faint smile on his lips.